King Arthur's Round Table wasn't just a fun name. It was actually round to prevent any knight from sitting at the head, encouraging fairness, unity, and collaborative decision-making. But there is no king of retro emulation, so the Retro Round Table is more equal than King Arthur's ever was. Take that, Arthur, you frickin' dead loser. The Retro Round Table is where the most chivalrous and valiant retro emulation knights gather to meld minds and share our nerdy opinions on everything related to retro games and emulation, and also to sometimes play Dungeons and Dragons on the weekends. Just check out this star-studded cast. We have Retro Breeze, Joey's Retro Handhelds, Mr. Sujano, Adin Walls, the Phawx, Stubbs from Retro Handhelds, the Retro Tech Dad, Retro Game Corps, special guest Aish from Aish Talks Tech, special guest Retro Fun Tech, and me, TechDweeb. Hello! Today we're here to get nerdy and dirty as we talk about the age-old question, do you prefer playing retro games via emulation or original hardware? And I need to caveat this entire discussion by acknowledging that this group of dweebs that I've gathered are all guys from the retro emulation community. It needs to be said that we are a bunch of biased mofos, especially this guy. And since this is a round table, we don't pick favorites round these parts, so for that we turn to the Toque of Randomness. First up, we have Joey. Say hi, Joey.
Hello.
Good boy. So, Joey, everyone's dying to know, do you prefer to play retro games via emulation or original hardware?
Oh, this is easy. Emulation, 1,100%. There is just no contest for me. And look, I grew up with what we call retro. So Super Nintendo, Game Boy Advance, everything. I had them all. And the one difference is I had those experiences already. I know what it's like to play on original hardware when I was growing up. And I'm never going to be able to recreate those experiences in that single spot in time and all of that nostalgia, all of it. Right now, it's for me is I want to play those games again, but I want to add retro achievements. I want save states. I want fast forward. I want all of the benefits of emulation. And they might not accurately emulate the systems correctly and all of that sort of thing that I'm willing to deal with. But it's real tough to go back and play original hardware nowadays without the benefits of emulation. It is something that you can go and enjoy, and I definitely do sometimes, but then I'm just like, I need to fast forward at this point. I can't play Pokemon without fast forwarding anymore and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, for me, emulation 1000% is my answer compared to original.
Alright, so definitely emulation for Joey. Life is too short. He needs fast forwarding in his Pokemon. Score 1 for emulation. And next up, it's gonna be Retro Breeze. Hey there, Shem.
Hey, what's up?
Oh, a whole lot of stuff actually. Mostly related to my Halloween costume, but we don't have time to talk about that because we need to hear your thoughts on emulation versus original hardware.
I personally emulate all of my retro games, but that's kind of because I don't have the space or the money to buy all the retro systems. In an ideal world, I'd have like a giant display unit of all the different retro systems and I could just flip one on and play. But the reality is pretty different. So I love that we can have all these retro games in our pocket or on like a consoleable device or a PC or whatever. But I definitely understand that there's an authenticity to original hardware too. What I will say is I really don't emulate a lot of Xbox 360 or PS3. PS3 emulation is really good, but you need a high-end computer for it. And Xbox 360 emulation just isn't quite there yet for me. So if I were to buy any original hardware right now, it would actually be either a 360 or a PS3.
Oh heck yeah, the 360 is such a good buy right now. Grab them while you can. The hat is telling me that we need to hear from, oh heck yeah, Retro Game Corps.
Hey everybody.
Okay Russ, let's hear it. Are you a pure retro emulation guy or an original hardware guy?
Well, I can totally see the value in original hardware. I love taking a Super Nintendo, hooking it up to a CRT and playing Super Mario World. It makes me feel like a superhero because there's like no input lag. So that's an amazing experience. However, I also worry about like the wear and tear on all the original hardware. So the cartridge itself, the player itself, as well as the actual controls, all of those things I get worried about, breaking them or something happening to them over time. And so as a result, I tend to just preserve them instead. That does lead me to just emulate more often. In addition, I like the conveniences of emulation. So if I want to play Super Mario World, I can play that on a handheld, and that's kind of amazing. I can take that anywhere with me. In addition, I've got all the comforts of emulation, including save states and rewind and fast forward and cheats. And so I like all of those parameters as well. So if I want the best overall experience and I've got the time to actually set up and do it, then I'm going to play on a CRT with original hardware. That's amazing. However, most of the time, like 99% of the time, I'm just going to emulate, and it'll usually be on a handheld just because of the novelty of that whole experience.
Yeah, that's a good point about preserving the original hardware. I think at a certain point, games and systems become a lot more precious as vintage objects to be protected, rather than just as toys to be played with. Surely we're not going to hear from Mr. Sujano next, right?
Hello there.
Wrong.
This should really not surprise anyone. Emulation. I mean, I am a retro game collector. I've got a whole bunch of different games for a whole bunch of different systems. I've got something like 5 or 6 SNESs. I've got a handful of PS2s. I've got a bunch of different Game Boys. I've got a lot of stuff. However, I always find myself going to emulation. It's far more convenient. You can do way more stuff with it. I mean, you can upscale games. You can use cheats very easily. You can save your state and come back to it when you want. You don't have the hassle of connecting everything, setting everything up, making sure everything works, and then trying to play in a very limited time. I don't have a CRT anymore. I use a RetroTink for my retro systems. And I just find it's way easier to boot up my PC or boot up my phone and just use an emulator.
Yeah, no surprises there. The guy that I get almost all my emulation news from prefers emulation. The prophecy has been fulfilled. Okay, Hat, pick me a good one. Ooh, excellent choice, Hat. Stubbs from Retro Handhelds. Hello, good sir. Yeah. So I was just wondering, Stubbs, do you prefer retro games via emulation or original hardware?
I am no original hardware enjoyer by any means these days. No. I don't know. I don't need it. Emulation, just if you get the right hardware for it, and use the right emulators, configure them, to me it fools me every time into feeling like the original experience. You can put on shaders, you can put on overlays, you can virtualize all this stuff and make it feel like the real thing. The one original console that I have is the PlayStation 1, that original gray model. Just the nostalgia factor for that. I have it hooked up to an old CRT, and that I sometimes just play on just to enjoy, just to get that extra level of nostalgia. But yeah, I've bought many Vitas in my time, Game Boys, DS's, all that, and I always go back to emulation devices. The tinkering, the setup, it's just emulation is magic. I mean, come on. Emulation is magic. FPGA is cool, Analog Pocket looks awesome. I enjoy it. My Game Boy Color OLED handheld it's a fun project. It looks great, but I always end up actually playing on an emulation device. So, I think that's my answer, man. Sorry that I'm eating the apple. How are you doing?
I'm good, buddy. Real good. Don't let me down, Hat. Give me a good dude. Retro Fun Tech, our special guest. She's not a dude. She's delightful, though.
Oh, hi there.
Hey, buddy. Thanks so much for joining us. Do you have any thoughts on the emulation versus original hardware thing?
All right, so this is a great question.
I know.
The purist in me really wants to say the original hardware that I grew up on for nostalgia's sake, and it should be the best way of playing retro games. However, now that we have a plethora of amazing retro handhelds that are portable, and there's so many different ways of playing these awesome games on, I actually would say that I prefer to play all the games using emulation so that they can be portable. And you don't have to fumble with cartridges or trip over cords and controllers and whatnot in your living room. Also, there is something definitely to be said about sitting in the parking lot of, say, Target while your family is spending all of your money and you don't care because you're just sitting there and you're jamming on your handheld and you have all of your retro games that you want right here in your hand. So as much as I would like to say the original hardware, this is kind of where it's at.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with the convenience of a handheld, for sure. Glorious hat of randomness, we beseech thee, pick us a dweeb. Oh, excellent choice. Introduce yourself, Rob.
Hi everyone, RetroTechDad here.
Everyone wants to know, Rob, do you prefer playing retro games via emulation or original hardware?
If you asked me a few years ago, I probably would have been all in on original hardware. Despite actually having a lot of experience with emulating and emulation on PC and even some of the older handhelds like the NVIDIA Shield, even going way back to the GP32. But for me, original hardware always kind of connected me to my childhood. It was more of a sense of nostalgia for me. And so that's why today I'm more 50-50 on it. I still very much enjoy original hardware. In fact, I have original hardware all around me and I still tinker with it. I still mess around with it. I still appreciate what we had at the time, especially the weaknesses. Things like Game Boy, for example, is a perfect example of how far we've come since Game Boy days in terms of 1989 and where we are today in 2024. So that's not to say emulation isn't a fantastic way to enjoy a lot of these games. And so nowadays, I'm definitely mostly in on emulation. I think it's hard to overlook the benefits that comes with emulation and what it means for people to enjoy these games today. Just not only the visual benefits, but the access to these games. That's a very important thing, which I think if we didn't have emulation, if we didn't have this available to us, I think so many people would go on not experiencing a lot of these great games. And so emulation is absolutely an important thing and it's a necessity.
Yeah, another win for emulation, well, which isn't surprising. I did invite a bunch of emulation nerds to answer the question after all, you know? Yeah, you know. And now it's none other than the Phawx. Hey there.
Yo.
Yo to you too, buddy. I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, but let's hear it. Emulation or original hardware? Which one is for you?
I'm super big on original hardware. You can see the Vectrex behind me right there. Right there. And I have all of my old stuff here. This is all stuff that was mine growing up. So the Power Glove's mine, that Earthbound I got in the 90s, Super Nintendo, that PAL SNES I got only a few years ago, that Nintendo, that N64, the Sega Saturn, all of these I got growing up, the TurboGrafx, the 360. So I typically prefer playing on original hardware, and especially things like Vectrex or the Virtual Boy, which is not on camera right now. Those are types of things that, yes, you can emulate them, but there's something that you are missing when you emulate them. Especially on Vectrex, you're not going to get that super crisp vector display, and that's something you really need to witness. And also using the outrageous controller on the Vectrex is something that you're going to miss as well. So not everyone's going to get that experience, but that is typically why I have all that stuff and why I always have the hardware. Is I typically prefer playing on hardware, especially like the Virtual Boy. It'll burn your eyeballs out, but it's part of the experience and I prefer it. Also, typically Teleroboxer is never set up correctly on any retro handheld, and you need to do that correctly, and it really needs dual analog sticks. Most people have that set up wrong, and Teleroboxer is without a doubt the best Virtual Boy game. Also, N64 emulation isn't fantastic. So it's gotten better just recently, but for a long time it's terrible. It's also like I have my library, my old library that I've had growing up is fairly decent. It's most of the games, N64 games that I prefer to play, but I'll have off the side of the screen, which you can't see, I actually have a BVM and a CRT that I plug into and I play on those screens just because they feel right at home, and I just prefer playing that way.
Yeah, that's a super good point, that there's stuff that you're missing, especially for those systems that had unique hardware. I've never tried a Vectrex, but I'm dying to. That's such a weird thing.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of weird things, next up is Aish. Aish from Retro Handhelds and Aish Talks Tech. Hey, buddy.
Hello.
All right, spill it. Emulation or original hardware? What you gonna pick?
For me, it's definitely going to be emulation, because as much as I love original hardware and I like owning it, emulation just makes it really easy to play a lot of the games that I grew up with, or probably new ones that I never got to experience. And if I want to really replicate that original feel, there's a lot of things you can do in things like RetroArch to give you that screen look, and you can grab different controllers if you want to plug it into a TV. So I don't feel like you're missing out a whole lot there. Plus, a lot of games that I grew up with, especially around the Super Nintendo era, had a lot of unfair mechanics that were meant to keep you playing for as long as possible. Things like unfair deaths in Donkey Kong or excessive grinding in RPGs are things that, with emulation, with things like save states and fast forward and even cheats for some of these games, you can kind of get around if you just want to go in and experience a story, or you just feel like picking up a platformer and playing a couple levels. So for those reasons, if I have the choice, I'm always going to go for something that can emulate versus just original hardware, because I feel I can get a lot more done that way, and we don't have a whole lot of time to sink 40 or 50 hours into a game when we can get it done in 10 to 15. Might not be the full experience, but I think it's pretty good.
So you admit to using fast forward, save states, and cheats, huh? I would certainly never have to resort to doing stuff like that. Why are you looking at me like that? The hat's getting pretty light. Oh, look at that. We're going to hear from Adin Walls. Hey, Adin.
Hey.
You know what I was wondering, Adin? I was wondering whether you prefer emulation or original hardware. True story.
So I think everyone can agree that PSP is better on emulation. I do still really like the action buttons on here. These action buttons really are lovely, and I do like, they are still some of my favorite buttons on a device. I think the only system really that we can admittedly say is still better on the original hardware, mainly just because it processes it better, does it better, is the 3DS. Still prefer using this. But for everything else, I prefer emulation. I love the challenge of emulation. I love trying Game Boy Advance on big screens, on small screens, all that sort of thing. I prefer emulation mostly for most systems.
Holy crap, am I last? I'm actually last. This is my frickin' show and I'm last. What the heck, man? Oh, what about that whole all knights are equal at the round table thing? Just shut up and answer the question. I've had lots of original hardware over the years, so many systems, freaking mountains of games, but when I'm ready to move on from a piece of hardware because it gets too annoying to deal with, or on handhelds when the screen technology feels too dated compared to modern devices, I just tend to want it out of my life. Out with the old and in with the new. But then the nostalgia bug hits. With every new income tax filing or gray hair I discover in my beard, when I want to escape this modern adult life and feel like a kid again, I often feel drawn to the games that I played as a little dweeb. Something to remind me of the simpler days when life wasn't so much work. When life was easy. And in those times, I don't want to dig out an old console from my dusty attic full of old yearbooks and mystery bones to figure out how to hook up the thing and blow into a cartridge to get it to work. I'll never bother. I just want to play games on whatever doodad I have on hand to take my retro gaming medicine as quickly as possible before some other piece of adult garbage barges into my life and demands my attention. Because for me, the games are what's special. Remembering the good times that they brought me and discovering new games from the past that I never got to play. The history of gaming deserves to be experienced by everyone, not just those who are willing to pay $300 for a used copy of Chrono Trigger on eBay. I love original hardware as kind of fascinating vintage objects, like antiques. But when it comes to playing games, emulation is the way I'm doing it. Let's be real here. That said, when a game or system benefits from original hardware, I'll always go for that. Games that utilize the Wiimote extensively, I'll keep the Wii around for those. I'm not getting rid of my DS or my 2DS because so many of those games are just more enjoyable to play when you can use the touchscreen. And can you really experience a Virtual Boy game without bleeding from your eyeballs a bit? You can try, but it's just not the same. And that brings us to the end, but it's not actually the end because now it's your turn. Emulation or original hardware? Let us know below, please. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is the last episode of the first season of the Retro Roundtable. Can you believe it? We've had some fun, talked about some nerdy stuff, made some jokes, ate some apples, but all good things must come to an end. And I would like to thank all the fine dweebs who took part in joining for this series. I think everyone loved to hear their retro game YouTube heroes nerding out, roundtable style. And I gotta say that this has been a dream come true for me. So thanks everyone for helping me make this a real thing. Even you, Stubbs. But, and that's a big but, This is not the end of the Retro Roundtable, not by a long shot, because I've already started work on the content for Season 2, and I've reached out to a few creators that I'm excited to tell you about, and if there are any retro YouTube dweebs out there that you'd like to see on this show, please comment or upvote them in the comments below. Tag them on social or whatever. Go bug them and tell them that when TechDweeb comes a knocking, they better be ready. A figurative knocking. I'm not actually gonna go knock on their door, just so we're clear. And that brings us to the actual end from all of us at the Retro Roundtable. Stay retro-y. Stay retro-y. Is that stupid? Yeah, that's probably stupid, right? Damn it, I messed up the outro of the big finale of the entire season. Freaking amateur hour over here. Man, I suck at my job. I'm good at burger time though, so at least there's that.